Hi, my name is Didier Mhlame and this is ATD. Confused about what ATD is? Click the first link in my description for a video titled What is ATD? That gives you quite a clear understanding about what ATD is, what we're all about, what I'm trying to build here. Click that video, watch that, and then you can come back to this and we can get right into the video. And for those still here, this is the first episode of a new series I'm going to be calling The Weekly Wrap. What are we going to be doing on The Weekly Wrap? On The Weekly Wrap, we're going to be covering all the stories in South African politics that have us all in a frenzy, and I will seek to explain them to you, exactly what's happening, and my opinion about them. It's a great way for us to have a concise understanding about the issues that are keeping the news cycle going for that week. However, with this being the first episode of The Weekly Wrap, I wanted us to do something a little bit different. Instead of getting into all the stories that are keeping South Africa in a frenzy this week. But what I wanted us to do in the first video of The Weekly Wrap is not to cover those stories just yet, but to rather give you an understanding of what to expect in this coming year politically, with it being an election year and probably the most important year in South African politics since 1994. So what I'm going to be doing in this first week of The Weekly Wrap is to give you an understanding of what to expect, what to look for, and what to do when it comes politically in South Africa in this next year. So let's get into the first episode of The Weekly Wrap, a beginner's guide to SA politics in 2024. This video is going to be split up into 3 sections. Firstly, before elections, during elections, and after elections, with the elections being the focal point. The period that we're going to be covering first in the first section of the video of before elections is January to May. During elections being, let's say, those 3 days in May, as we like to call them, and then after elections, everything that happens after elections, coalitions, the new administration, parliament, all of that. That's what we're going to be covering in those 3 sections of the video. Each section will have key points that I think every single South African should be taking a look at different parts of the year. So let's get into it. Pre-election, January to May. When it comes to the period before the elections, which is probably January to May, I think there's 4 key points that South Africans should be taking a look at. Firstly, what opposition parties are doing and how they're operating and how they're campaigning. Secondly, young voter apathy and young voters specifically not wanting to go out to vote. Thirdly, general service delivery in your individual community. And then fourthly, I think then another key point to look at in this period would have to be Ramaphosa and the last days of the 6th administration. Okay, now when it comes to opposition party politics, there's a lot of different things that every voter should be taking a look at, but I think the most important thing that we should be taking a look at is the big buzzword in politics in 2024, coalitions, and what those coalitions mean for South Africans on a daily basis. Well, in 2021, we came out after the 2021 local government elections, we came out with a very interesting situation, a life-changing situation in the history of this country, frankly. We came out of a situation where the ANC did below 50% nationally. They got about 45% in the 2021 local government elections. Of course, yes, the rebuttal that an ANC supporter would take out is that usually voters don't usually come out for local government elections. As such, that number shouldn't be a shocking thing. So, coming out of the 2021 local government elections with the ANC doing below 50% nationally, what we got to see is 2 key things. Firstly, how opposition parties operate when they get to govern, when they get to do the thing that they campaign for all year round. What we got to see was, an example would be the Patriotic Alliance in the Karoo with Gayton McKenzie, the leader of that party, getting to be mayor in Karoo. And then you had all these stories of pit latrine toilets being taken out, pools being fixed, very basic, mundane service delivery things happening. The same can be said about Chris Pappas in KZN. Of course, the DA has governed in the Western Cape for probably majority of our young democracy, but what we got to see is how they govern in a province outside of the Western Cape in KZN and how they operate in that different political terrain, shall we say. And secondly, what we got to see, which I think is more important, which is what voters should take a look at, is the lack of maturity that politicians seem to have when it comes to coalition politics. And I'll give you a great example. A great example would have to be the Johannesburg municipality. We had a situation where, coming out of 2021, we've had 4 mayors in that municipality. Of course, Dada Morere being one that was unconstitutionally put in and then, of course, removed. The point remains, the fact that coming out of 2021, they've had 4 different mayors since that election in the 3 years speaks to a lack of maturity shown by politicians. And truth be told, South Africans just can't take that at a national level. Now let me set the scene for you. Monday, you wake up, Monday morning you wake up and the president is Cyril Ramaphosa. Wednesday you wake up, the president is John Steenhuisen. Then a month later you wake up, the president is Julius Malema. Of course, I don't think that's a possibility, but the politicians have shown us that if they can do that at local level, why can't they do that at national level? If they can show this level of immaturity at a local level, who says that when you get to national level, where you're dealing with, besides just service delivery issues, but issues of policy that shift a country, why would we believe that they're going to show that level of maturity? And it's important for voters to take note of that. Now, another thing that I think voters should take a look at seriously, besides coalitions, would have to be the Moonshot Pact, or rather I say the multi-party charter right now. This sort of pre-election agreement between a few parties that are in parliament and out of parliament, where they say, as a group, whatever happens after the elections, we are going to work together and we're going to try and form a government if we can get over 50%. While I do believe, frankly, I think this charter isn't going to go anywhere. I'll explain that in a future video. I do think South Africans should take a look at it, and whenever you see them in the media, just listen to what they say, listen to their policy. Even if it seems boring, mundane, I think it's important to take a look at that. But frankly, in conclusion, when it comes to opposition party politics, the biggest thing South Africa should take a look at is which parties align with which parties. What do I mean by that? I mean, listen to how John Steenhuisen speaks about Cyril Ramaphosa. Listen to how Julius Malema speaks about Cyril Ramaphosa. Because we are in a situation where we can come out of these elections and the ANC goes below 50%, but let's say they get 45. They need to find 5% to form a government, to have a cabinet, to have a president that they vote behind. So listen to how the small parties speak about the ANC, how they speak about Cyril Ramaphosa specifically, and if they have a situation if there might be a situation where they work together. So another key thing that I think we should pay attention to is young voter apathy. Now, what is young voter apathy? Young voter apathy is the idea, the concept that young voters, specifically under the age of 39, shall we say, don't seem to want to participate in the democratic process of voting. And the interesting thing is that the phrase always that goes around in politics is that if the 18 to 39 category can vote for a specific party, they can form a government however way they want to. They don't need any other partners. They don't need any help from anyone else. But somehow, the young voters don't seem to be picking up that message. They don't seem to be wanting to participate in the democratic process of voting. So with that being a backdrop, I think what is interesting, I think we should really pay attention to, is what happens at the Department of Higher Education and what Minister Blade Nzimande does. And I'll tell you why. Fees and registration issues have always been sort of a part of South African politics now. Every year in the period of January to March, you'll know about the protests that happen all over campuses about fees, about what NSFAS does. And of course, now this year it's on the backdrop of the allegations of corruption at NSFAS. But I think what's more important this year is that if you have a situation where the elections are in May and these protests are happening in February, in March, even spilling over into April, and students feel as though they're not being listened to, they feel as though the politicians, the leaders, NSFAS, doesn't seem to be making any change, those student activists could swing the election in two different ways. Swing the election in not showing up to the democratic process, not going to vote, which I actually think will be positive for parties like the ANC, because you'll find more than likely those parties that the votes that are taken away from those young people will go towards the ANC. Not in the sense that you're thinking about in that conspiracy theory that's going around that if you don't vote, your vote goes to the ANC. That's a lie. But what I mean is that you have a situation where that proportion will happen to go to all the voters who are more likely to vote for the ANC. Now, secondly, if the ANC government, the administration of Ramaphosa, if Minister Blade doesn't fix that issue, you'll have a situation where those voters go and participate in the democratic process, but participate against the ANC, specifically because of the issues that they have with fees and accommodation, very basic things of registration. And I think that's something that I don't think the Ramaphosa administration is paying enough attention to, and I do think it becomes a problem. I think every year, of course, we have this conversation, but I think this year, in an election year, they should pay more attention to that. Now, thirdly, the most important thing that I think we should be paying attention to pre-election is general service delivery. Studies across the globe show that voters base on what they see. They vote based on the fact that they have electricity, they have water, they have job opportunities, they see a government that's stimulating the economy, right? Providing a better life for them. The incumbent is in a great place because he has the resources, the service, to campaign not at door to door, but rather to campaign in their government by providing services for ordinary citizens. So it's not rocket science that if the Ramaphosa administration can't minimize or reduce the impact of load shedding heading into elections specifically, they will feel the bite at the polls, right? That's why I think as South Africans, but the media more specifically, should pay attention to three political figures in government right now. The Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Minister Gwede Mantashe, and the Minister of Electricity within the presidency, Minister Ramakgopa. And I'll tell you why this is important. If they can reduce the impact of load shedding, that will have a genuine impact on what happens at the polls. Now, lastly, I think the most important thing to take a look at as South Africans before elections would have to be the Ramaphosa administration and what they do right now. Because we're sitting with a situation right now where Cyril Ramaphosa will be the first president to preside over the ANC getting below 50%, not just at local government, but at national government, where the ANC will really begin to feel the pinch. Now, of course, I've explained how he can prevent that with making sure that his HODs, his ministers, are doing their job, providing basic service delivery to citizens right now. But I think these two key places where he should pay close attention to when it comes to his administration, his people, his cabinet, his top six within the ANC. Now, firstly, when it comes to the work of Ramaphosa and administration, a key place that I don't think enough commentators are speaking about is inside the cabinet. You will know that Ramaphosa had a cabinet sometime, I believe it was last year or 2022, where he did a cabinet reshuffle, put in really people that he can sort of trust. He got rid of any little bit of people within the ANC that he put there because he was doing a political chess move, shall we say. He got really people within his administration, within his cabinet, that believe in him. However, we have a situation now where the ANC goes below 50%. Let me set the scene for you. They go below 50%, they've got 46, 47. And they need that extra 4-5% from a different political party. And they decide to go with a smaller political party. Now, that smaller political party, let's say it's the Good Party, because that's a perfect example. Now, the Good Party goes, yes, we'll vote for you to be president, because MPs vote for who becomes president. They go, we'll vote for you, we'll form a government, but we want 3 ministerial posts compared to the one that they have now with Patricia de Lille. So they go, we want 3 or 4 ministerial posts. What does that mean? That means 4 ANC cadres are going to be losing their jobs. They're going to have to be moved, probably to a lower salary, to a different position. And I think certain ministers will begin to realize that going closer and closer to the election. So we might have a situation where all of a sudden a cabinet minister sort of speaks against Ramaphosa in a short tidbit interview here, does something here, says something here. And I think we should take note of who says that and when they say that. Because then you might have a situation where that cabinet minister wants to show to people, to the media, to the public, that no, I'm not a puppet of Ramaphosa, because the tide might shift and you'll have a situation where Cyril Ramaphosa isn't the president post-elections. Now, secondly, what I think President Cyril Ramaphosa should pay close attention to is the business of the ANC internal politics. What do I mean by that? So, while it is true that that Cyril Ramaphosa, through his first ANC presidential term, going into his second one, has sort of silenced or eliminated any one of his political rivals, whether that's Ace Magashule, whether that's Lindiwe Sisulu, whether that's Carl Niehaus, he's all but either removed them from the party or silenced them. So, while yes, the party is the most Ramaphosa that it's ever been, we might have a situation where all those little pockets that are beginning to leave the ANC leave with voting bases. Ace Magashule takes a voting base from the Free State, which I don't think is as significant as other commentators are saying. Lindiwe Sisulu takes a base. Jacob Zuma takes a base. So you have a situation where they're all sort of crunching away from this 57% that Ramaphosa got in 2019, and they're all sort of taking it away, bit by bit by bit by bit by bit. And then I don't think, of course, people obviously leave the ANC usually before elections. That's how COPE was formed, that's how the EFF was formed. But I think it is the most significant that it's ever been this year, this voting cycle. So yeah, that's the 4 areas that I think South Africans should take a look at pre-elections. Take a look at the work that opposition party politics is and what's happening in regards to that. Take a look at general service delivery in your community. Take a look at young voter apathy, and then take a look at the moves that Cyril Ramaphosa has within the last days of his administration. Now, when it comes to during the period of elections, when elections are actually happening, let's title it to the 3 days in May. These 3 areas, ironically, that I think South Africans should take a look at. Firstly, where the ANC puts its focus, i.e. where they put national figures like Gwede Mantashe, figures like Fikile Mbalula. Secondly, i.e. the sore losers within the elections, people who might take the IEC to court based on the results. And thirdly, the general flow of the elections and the safety of voters at voting booths, because that's another issue that's come up this year particularly. Now, when it comes to where the ANC puts its focus during that time period, I think what we need to understand is that, of course, the ANC, as we know, is in a financial predicament, shall we say. They don't have as much money as they did before. Donors have sort of started to dry up. So what we might find is that usually the ANC is able to stretch itself across every corner of the country, but I think in this election specifically, they're going to have a struggle in doing such. A great example of how the ANC has begun to sort of stretch themselves going into this election cycle would be, take a look at the past 2 registration weekends. Usually the ANC is probably the first party to put up their posters encouraging voters to register to vote, encouraging voters to vote for them specifically. But in this 2 voter registration weekends, you'll remember, I personally, this is in my own ward, in my own city, I saw the ANC putting up posters only on the Wednesday of registration weekend, even sometimes the Thursday, sometimes that Friday. And specifically taking a look at which wards in my city they put up. They don't put up their posters everywhere. And I think that's important to take note of, because what we might find is that ANC is sort of cutting their losses in other communities and paying attention to other communities where they think they can get an election win that will get them over that 50% mark. A great example of that would be hosting their manifesto launch in KZN. KZN, we know, is a battleground province going into this election. We don't know who's going to take it. As such, all of us should take a close look at it. So yeah, when it comes to that, I think South Africa should take a really close look at where specifically national senior ANC officials are deployed, because that will give us an idea of where the ANC thinks they have a chance of winning. Now, the second thing that I think we should really be taking a look at in those 3 days in May, as I'm calling them, is the sore losers of the election, because there's obviously going to be those people who say they don't agree with the election result that the IEC declares. Now, of course, one of the saving graces of the South African democracy is that we've never had someone at a large scale go, they don't believe in the election results. The election is rigged, shall we say. Of course, in 2019, there was a few parties that came out and said they're taking the IEC to court because they didn't believe their polls don't register with the votes that they got. Little nitty-gritty things like that, but no one at a large scale has said something about that. But if you have a situation where, after these elections, a lot of different parties with a lot of different constituencies all go, they don't believe what the IEC is saying, I think I would go as far as to saying that's a threat to our democracy. That is usually the first indication that a democracy is slowly failing and collapsing. When people go, they don't believe in the results that have come out of the democratic process, because then you have a situation where the government that is put in has a legitimacy issues, because voters and opposition parties don't believe in the results of that election. So yeah, that's the 3 key points that I think we should be paying attention to during elections, during those 3 days in May. The sore losers of the election, the general flow of the election, and where the ANC puts their focus. Now, going to my favorite part of the video, frankly, what happens after the elections? Post-elections, what happens? In the period of June to December, what can we look forward to as ordinary South Africans? And frankly, I think it's threefold. I think there's 3 things that we should really pay attention to post-elections. Firstly, what happens nationally? i.e. who becomes our president, who are our MPs, who's our ministers. Secondly, what happens provincially, because we know this is a national and provincial elections, i.e. who are our premiers, who are our MECs, what parties which win. And then thirdly, general service delivery. Again, is there going to be an indication that there was an election and South Africans are beginning to see the fruits of participating in the democratic process? Now, when it comes to national politics and the national outlook, there's one buzzword that has been spoken about in 2024 politics in South Africa. That's, of course, coalitions. Now, I think there's three political realities that will happen post-election. Firstly, the ANC doing about 50 to 51%, which is where I'm leaning towards right now. I'm not too convinced by any of the polls, frankly. I heard another commentator say this past week he thinks the ANC will struggle to get 40%. Now, Cyril Ramaphosa was able to get 57% in 2019. I don't think there's a political reality where he is going to shave 17 percentage points post-election. I just don't see that reality. I just don't think it is possible. So, frankly, right now, maybe things change. We're still far from the election. Maybe they do. Maybe my opinion changes right now. But right now, I'm steadfast on 51%. Now, in that scenario, post-election, things will be business as usual. The Ramaphosa administration will go forward. He will have his second term, same cabinet ministers, same cabinet, business as usual. Now, the second political reality, which I think is really important for us to take a look at, is a situation where the ANC does between 45% and 49%. And I'll tell you why this specific one is important. Because then the ANC would just need about 5% from any political party that they can find. And then in that situation, they've got two options. Firstly, they can go to a smaller party like the Good Party, like the Patriotic Alliance, like the ATM, like all of these different political parties, and offer them a cabinet role, a cabinet position, and they can get over that 50% mark and they can go on. Now, the second option that the ANC would have in the situation where they do 45 to 50% is to make a deal with the figurative devil. Either they go with the EFF, which I do think they'll get about 15% in this election. Let's go with that. Let's say the ANC does 45, say 45 plus 15, you get a 60%, you have almost a 2/3 majority in parliament. They can bulldoze any budget, any policy position that they would like to go about. It almost becomes a closed boys club. Now, the other party that they can work with in opposition politics, which is also being spoken about a lot, is the DA. Let's say the ANC does 45% and the DA does 20%. Then they will have this 2/3 majority. And we've heard certain ANC veterans and certain senior leaders within the DA speaking about the idea of working with Ramaphosa's ANC and Steenhuisen's DA, and they form sort of a grouping. They bulldoze whatever they want, and they have a sort of a closed boys club. Now, the third scenario that can happen post-elections, which I think is really important to take a look at, which I think will be a watershed moment in this election. If this happens, if this scenario happens, then we will have long-term generational change in politics in South Africa forever. If the ANC goes below 45%, if they do between 40 and 45%, then you have a political reality where all opposition parties close the door completely on the ANC. Where Cyril Ramaphosa doesn't even have a possible chance at being the president of the country, where the cabinet will do a complete shift, where things will change seismically. And in that political reality, that's when the Moonshot Pact, the multi-party charter, comes into fruition. That's when you have a situation where we will see changes that shift the terrain forever. Now, those are the three political reality, the three scenarios that are going to happen post-elections. Frankly, in my view, I think the ANC is going to do 51%, maybe 45 to 50%, but nothing under 45%. I think that's a pipe dream. It's not a reality. Anyone who says that to you, frankly, is living in a fantasy, or is a politician's campaigning, trying to convince you to vote for them. Now, going on to my second point about what we should take a look at post-elections, provincially, what happens? Who becomes premier of certain provinces and MECs in certain provinces? Of course, we can take a look at all the provinces in the country. I would love to do that, and I am going to do that. I'm going to be doing that as we get closer to the election. But there is three provinces that I think we should take a key look at. Firstly, KwaZulu-Natal. Secondly, Gauteng, and thirdly, the Western Cape. Of course, all three of these provinces being almost the economic powerhouses of the country. Let's take Gauteng first. We know that the ANC wasn't able to do 50% within Gauteng, within the local government elections, which I think is the stat that we should really be taking a look at. The big power player in that province, specifically in my view, is the Action SA, and how the Action SA swings and fares within this election. If they can get above 30%, if they can get above 40% even, which is, of course, seems like insane, but I think it's a possible political reality, then you have a situation where, at a provincial level, you can shut the door out on the ANC, where the DA, where the EFF, where the Action SA, where Patriotic Alliance, where all of these opposition parties go, we're done with the ANC in Gauteng. And then you have a situation where you're going to make a lot of ANC officials unemployed overnight. And I think that will be particularly interesting. Now, secondly, the second province that I think we should be taking a look at is, of course, KwaZulu-Natal. We know that is going to be a battleground province going into this election. We know every single party sort of is throwing their resources within that province because of how important it is. That's why the EFF is having their manifesto launch there. That's why the ANC is having their manifesto launch there. That's why the DA is putting so much effort there. That's why the IFP, of course, is having their manifesto launch. A lot of parties are paying attention to KwaZulu-Natal. It is important. So, as voters, specifically in KwaZulu-Natal, but nationally, we should really pay attention to the situation that happens in KwaZulu-Natal. And of course, we know the history of political shootings and killings within that province, which is what makes this election so important. If common sense doesn't prevail within that province, we might see a reality. And this does seem sort of very like I'm trying to set a scene that's just not possible. We might see a situation where a reality where a sort of full-fledged political war occurs within that province. So as voters, we should take a really close look at how parties operate in there, what they say. That's really an important part of it. In KwaZulu-Natal, words mean something. Now, thirdly, the province that I think most people will be shocked to hear me talk about is the Western Cape. There's certain polls that have come out that, of course, we know the Western Cape has sort of become this DA stronghold and no one will take it away from it. But there's certain polls that have the political reality of the DA going below 50% in the Western Cape. Now, I'll tell you why that's important. Because it's important for one party and one party specifically. A party that I think all of us should really be paying attention to, the Patriotic Alliance. We know their views when it comes to immigration and all these things, but we might have a situation where they're the kingmaker within the Western Cape, where they can swing elections, where you might have a situation where they even shut the door out on the DA completely and bring in the EFF, bring in the ANC and sort of form a provincial government by themselves. So those are the three provinces that I think we should really be paying attention to provincially. Now, the third point that I think all citizens should be paying attention to when it comes to post-elections is general service delivery. How is your life going to be changed after the election? Are you going to be seeing the unemployment rate slowly declining? Are you going to be seeing job opportunities rising? Are you going to be seeing issues like load shedding, issues of service delivery countrywide changing? Or are you going to be seeing more of the same? And the reason that it's important, because all of us are billing this election to be the most important since 1994. But what happens if the political reality often after the elections is more of the same? Most South Africans, I fear, are going to then leave the democratic process. And then we're going to have to speak about things that maybe shock most South Africans because they seem so far happening in Africa. But then we might have to see a reality where a coup might occur, where citizens feel we tried, this doesn't work. This this democracy process is not for us. We're going to be trying something else. Now, with all of that said, in the three parts of this video, pre-elections, during elections, and post-elections, the fundamental question we should be asking in 2024 is that are we going to see actual change in the lives of ordinary citizens? Is this election going to be the moment where things shift a different way? It's 30 years of democracy this year. It's really, really important what occurs this year. It's a moment for us to reflect on our gains, on our democratic gains, and where we can change the scoreboard. And frankly, that's all I have to say in this video. I hope that you found it helpful. I hope that we come back to this, that you maybe come back to this video just before the elections, after the elections. Maybe you see some of the things I said came to be. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe we can have a conversation in the comment section. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you're really paying attention to in 2024. Tell me, ask any questions that you think I might have the answer to, or someone in the comments might have the answer to. Let's have a conversation. Let's build a community. This is the first installment of the weekly wrap. There's going to be one every week on a Tuesday. Pay close attention to that. Pay close attention to the channel in general, and us on other social media platforms: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat, anywhere you can find us. Let us engage. Let's have a national conversation. Let's have opposing opinions. Let's really amplify the divide. Beyond that, please do like and subscribe this video, share it with a friend. See you soon.